Just when I think Mandalorian is catching fire and getting to the really good stuff, they hit me with a
not today.
And take their sweet ass time. Listen, I'm all for slow-paced storytelling. I like to think I have a certain tolerance for, you know, narrative structure that inches its way towards a finish line. You've got to have a sense of patience with a plot that withholds information along the way. But so far with Season 2 of Mando, it feels like each episode is one step forward and 3 steps back. And that's not to say the episodes aren't good. They're great, actually. I'm really enjoying them. They're really entertaining. Even the most average Mandalorian episode is better than most television. It just makes it more difficult to be invested in the plot further along. Let's get into it. Chapter 12 starts off with a visual representation of what it was like to help my dad around the house growing up.
The red one, but don't let them touch. Hold them apart from... No, hold them apart.
The Razor Crest is crazy damaged, so they go somewhere more comfortable and familiar for repairs. Back to Navarro, where Cara Dune is the marshal and Grief Karga, I hate, that's such a weird fucking name. Grief Karga is like the fucking mayor or something, I don't know. Since the end of Season 1, Navarro's turned into like a pretty upstanding planet. Everyone's chilling, having a good time, trading what they want. They've even got a school now from the old room that was like exploding in the last season, full of snot-nosed kids who don't share their snacks with Baby Yoda. A crime punishable by death if it was up to me. And the fishfuck Mithril from Season 1, Episode 1 is there too, paying off his debts working for Karga. Grief and Cara tell Mando about an Imperial base on the other side of the planet that's got nothing more than like a skeleton crew. So they want to go, wipe it out, and that way Navarro can be this like peaceful trade hub for that corner of the universe. But when they get there, they realize, obviously, that it's much more than an Imperial military base. It's not even a military base at all, it's a laboratory. They take out some Imperial guys, and they're in a room full of vats of mutated, malformed clones. And when they check the computers, they find a hologram of that doctor from Season 1 going on about how test subjects were rejecting blood and how they need a donor with a higher M count and how he can only get a small amount from the child. Higher M count most likely being midichlorians. My initial thoughts, I had to pause that part of the episode because I was getting heated. My initial thoughts was this is the beginning of Palpatine's return clone process. We're seeing like the first stages of what eventually led to the rise of Skywalker. And I fucking hate that. The charm of The Mandalorian always felt like that it was just outside the like original canon of the Skywalker saga. The only things really similar that connect them in one universe is the time period of being 5 years after the fall of the Empire and similar settings, Tatooine, stuff like that. It gave the show a little more room to be experimental and push some interesting boundaries. And that is just not something you can do when you go back to the same story they've been telling for 40 years. That's what kind of sucks about having the sequel trilogy exist. Now you have this bookend where we know after all of this, everything with Mando, it's going to lead to the First Order, to Snoke, to Palpatine returning through clone form. It feels like The Mandalorian is this guy going out for a swim, and the Skywalker saga is that fucking guy that tries to push other people down so they don't drown. Effectively influencing any other kind of story outside of that main story. Now, I could be wrong. That could all be wrong. It might not directly connect to Palpatine and his return in clone form, but it's not ridiculous to assume that that's what they're going with. For me, it just, at the moment, it takes out all of the excitement from what might be coming of the remains of the Empire. At the end of the hologram, they find out Gideon is still alive. He didn't die in that crash at the end of Season 1, obviously. So Mando goes all mom mode and jetpacks all the way back to town to make sure Baby Yoda's safe. Meanwhile, Cara, Grief, and Mithril are blasting their way through the base before it explodes. A pretty cool chase scene with some TIE fighters ensues, and they get their asses saved by Mando in the Razor Crest with Baby Yoda at his side, followed by the cutest baby barf up ever. Some New Republic dorks show up to make everything lame, and it cuts to one of the mechanics who worked on the Razor Crest reporting to an Imperial officer on Moff Gideon's ship about how he implanted a tracker into the Razor Crest, to which she replies that the mole will be rewarded in the new era. And finally, we see Gideon walking through this hallway full of, like, I thought they were like Vader-looking trooper suits, because they were like all yoked and jet black, so that actually seemed pretty cool. But I just want to take a second to bitch and moan about this new era shit. There's roughly 30 years separating the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy. And Mando takes place 5 years after the original trilogy ends. So how many eras can there be in... That's such a short amount of time. How many eras can there be between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy? When we meet the First Order, they're like pretty well established. Snoke is incredibly well established as this like giant new leading force for both, you know, Kylo and for, what was his name? Hux? Hux? The Starkiller base is huge, so you know it must have taken a while to put that together. They've been growing stormtroopers for what feels like years, apparently. You know, at the start of it, that was an institution to the First Order. Is the new era the start of the First Order? Is that what's happening there? At what point does Snoke, this jacked up clone of Palpatine, come into power of the First Order within that, like, 23 years, or 27 years of time in between the Mandalorian and the sequel trilogy? It sort of feels like the narrative equivalent of Obi-Wan going from looking like this to looking like this after just 3 decades. So overall, this episode felt like yet another buffer, but the only difference being some information sprinkled out. Just a little bit of information sprinkled throughout. And the information sprinkled throughout raises more questions than answers. Episodes 1, 2, and 3 of this season built up this, like, sense of momentum in an incredibly slow fashion, and then to have this episode follow that, spread that momentum as thin as possible. And considering Mando's seasons are only 8 episodes long, I'm just worried that, I just hope that the last 4 episodes of the season aren't, I don't know, rushed, or they try to fill it with as much as they can. Find that balance between interesting and exciting. It's possible. They've done it before. Just so far, the first half of this season has either been, like, exciting with some shit that goes down, like fighting the Krayt Dragon or meeting the other Mandalorians, or partly interesting with finding all these clones and the M count bullshit. And that's pretty much it. Comment below what theories you have about the rest of the season, what you thought of this episode. And I'll see you next time.